All right, so I've got a selection of orchids here that I'm going to mount, and I tried to pull sort of a varied choice list. So the first thing is Rhyncholaelia glauca, um, variety alba. So this came from a compot. Looks very small. Looks a little bit dried out, but that's sort of by intention. I left it out for a while because I wanted to get some new root growth. So I wanted to make sure that it was good to go. One thing about orchids is that all of these really dried up roots, these will all regenerate. They're all alive. They're all good. They might not look like it right now. This orchid is a little bit, it's a little bit stressed for water, but once this thing gets some good quality water, once it gets mounted properly, this thing is going to perk right up. All of these roots are going to come back alive and do some great things. So, very first thing I want to do very first question I want to ask when I see a plant like this is, how big is this plant going to be when it's mature? Is this plant is this the mature size? Is this flowering size, which it could be? Or is this thing going to turn into a monster? I've grown these a bit. They have big, showy, awesome flowers, but they don't turn into massive plants. They'll get like maybe that big. So they get wider and bigger. They don't turn into these monsters. So I'm going to look through my mounts, and I think that the very first one I grabbed here, I like this one. I'm going to stick with this. I think this is a good one. So, okay, so what I'm going to do is this is the way I do it. There's probably a million techniques on how to mount these, but I'm going to take that root growth and I'm going to place that against the wood, and I'm going to go maybe about 1/4 of the way up with the plant. And what I'm doing is I'm just imagining what this plant is going to look like as it matures. So the roots have quite a bit of space. When I've grown and mounted ones in wet areas, the roots start to drip down, which I think looks fantastic. But the plant is not going to overgrow and grow well above this. It should really only grow at most up to this height. And really what it'll do over time as it gets mature over the years is it'll start wrapping around this and just turn this into a clump. So I know that the growth, you can see that if you look closely in there, there is one nice big root, there's another one, and there's actually 3 little roots coming out. So what I'm seeing is that the growth on this is the first growth, this is the oldest growth, this is the newest growth, this is the newest growth. So I'm going to place that oldest growth like that, and what's going to happen is this plant's going to grow and mature in this direction and up like this. So I'm going to stick it, that's basically where I'm going to mount this plant. The second question I have to ask myself are, what is this plant's water requirements? So some plants that don't need a lot of water or are used to drier conditions, I may not even put anything on here at all. I may not put any moss or anything, just let the plant fend for itself. In other situations, I might put a little. If I'm doing something that's like a bulbophyllum or a Southeast Asian tropical that's in a super drenched rainforest all the time, I'll put a lot of moss. In this case, I have my bucket of soaked sphagnum moss, and what I'm going to do is just kind of go somewhere in the middle, and I'm going to take a little bit of moss, not a lot, nothing crazy, and I'm just going to put this here. And the only point for this moss, for me at least at this level, is when the plant gets watered, when it gets rained on here, this moss will saturate and hold a little additional moisture in the plant while it's young. As the plant gets mature, the pseudobulbs will hold that moisture. Okay, so at this point, this is exactly how I want it. So perfect scenario is this would just be stuck here, but what I need to do is use my fishing line. So what I do is I have a nail down. The fishing line all has these holes. It's designed to be spun, which is fantastic. I put this down. I think you'll have to stand over here. I put the mount against my stomach, and in this situation you can actually bend the wire out of the way, and I chose one that's going to impale me on a piece of wood, but it's okay. I'm not pushing that hard. It's not too big of a mount. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take maybe 4 inches of this, and I'm going to hold that. I'm going to pinch that on the bottom. So I have enough left over that I can tie it. And so this finger right here is never going to leave this. It's always going to hold this the whole time I'm wrapping this. So I'm going to hold this. Again, that left hand, that left index finger is holding the fishing line. And I'm going to start wrapping this around. And the absolute critical part about mounting an orchid is that you cannot allow the plant to hang off. You can't allow it to be loosely mounted. So what I do actually is I'm giving a lot of compression here. I'm really holding it down. And when I get into the actual, so that's down on the root side. That's one thing. So I can be kind of rough and quick on this, but when I start getting into the plant itself, I'm going to be firm but careful that I'm pressing it in, holding it in tightly, and getting inside. And I don't want to cut it. Absolutely don't want to cut it, but I want to make sure that this is firmly affixed. Because in mounting, the worst thing you could do is mount something, start to get some maturity on it, start to get some root growth, and then the thing flops forward. So in this case, this thing is not going anywhere. I've got it pretty firmly affixed. Over time, hopefully very quickly, it'll start getting some roots that climb up here, and as soon as that happens, this thing is going to be firmly affixed. So at this point, I never let go with this finger always held. I'm going to cut, and now I'm holding both ends of this, and I'm just going to tie it. I'm just going to do one simple tie. The trick I use is I actually, if you could see that, I put it inside of my nail right there, and I take the second line and I go right in this little groove in between my nail and my finger. I don't know if other people's biology is set up like that, but there's just a perfect little opening on my finger like that. And now I can tighten it. I can do it again. I don't really find it necessary to do it again, but I'll do it just to be safe and thorough, careful and thorough. See, I can't even do it again because I don't do it that way. So, okay, so it's tied twice. Gonna cut off the excess and throw away this. I would recommend keeping a little garbage container because that can get irritating. So now this thing is mounted. It might not look like much now, but in a couple of weeks this is going to start rooting out and look really great. I'll correct this and put this back up. The last thing, and this is fairly critical, I've got my plant label here. So what I like to do on mounted plants is I cut off the pointy part, because that's for sticking in the soil, and this one happens to be a longer label, but I cut off the pointed part. I take my hole punch and punch a hole somewhere like that, and then this fits in there just magically. That's not going to go anywhere. I have that kind of, actually, and just for precautionary sake, and I think this is definitely worth it, you can actually squeeze that in. You don't want that label. That label is now locked in place, and that is how you mount an orchid. Thank you.